when Donald Trump spoke about Los Angeles, painting a picture of chaos, lawlessness, and total breakdown. Many across the country believed him. After all, the President of the United States stood behind the podium and delivered his words with certainty, as if he alone held the truth about what was happening in America's second-largest city. But for people actually living in Los Angeles, the story was very different. On the ground, what residents and eyewitnesses saw did not match the frightening narrative being pushed from the White House. The city wasn't in flames. It wasn't under siege. Yet, Trump described it as if the apocalypse had arrived on Hollywood Boulevard. This disconnect became glaringly obvious when late-night host Jimmy Kimmel, who lives in LA, decided to respond. What followed wasn't just a comedy routine, and it was a searing takedown of presidential dishonesty, a reminder of how far reality can be bent when it serves political power, and a moment that revealed just how much chaos could be manufactured with a few exaggerated words. And before we go deeper into this unraveling story, let us pause for just a second. If you're new here, this is Scandal Pulse, where we break down the spin, uncover the truth, and put power under the spotlight it would rather avoid. If you appreciate voices that cut through the noise and reveal what's really happening behind the curtain, make sure to subscribe right now. Join us in exposing what those in power never want you to notice. Back to Los Angeles. Trump, standing tall as if narrating a national emergency, painted a dire image. He suggested the city was collapsing into violence, overrun by chaos that only his leadership could contain. He spoke as if the city was one spark away from turning into a war zone. His words meant to instill fear and urgency. But here's the problem. People who were actually there, people like Jimmy Kimmel and millions of Angelenos, knew this wasn't the case. The protests happening in LA at that moment were largely peaceful. Yes, there were small moments of tension, a garbage can fire here, a brief scuffle there, but nothing resembling the dystopia Trump described. Instead of flames licking the skyline, it was another warm Southern California day. Calm skies, 70-degree sunshine. Yet from Trump's mouth, it was as if the world's last battle was being fought on Melrose Avenue. Jimmy Kimmel, with his trademark mix of humor and disbelief, didn't let this slide. He cut straight to the heart of it. The absurdity of hearing the President of the United States warn of bloodthirsty fruit vendors taking over LA was so ridiculous it hardly needed a punchline. Thank God, Jimmy joked sarcastically for President Trump and the heroes at IC for protecting us from these dangerous fruit stand vendors spreading pineapple chunks and mangoes with a squirt of lime across the city. With that one line, Jimmy captured the absurdity of the entire situation. It wasn't just about comedy. It was about revealing how disconnected Trump's narrative was from reality. The president wasn't describing a real crisis. He was creating one. He was amplifying minor incidents, spinning them into something monstrous, and doing it for one reason: to stay in control of the national conversation. This is a pattern that defines so much of Trump's presidency. Take something small, something manageable, twist it into a national emergency, and then position himself as the only solution. It's a move straight from the strongman playbook. As Jimmy pointed out, the president wasn't protecting people. He was putting them in danger. By sending in thousands of troops, by escalating instead of calming, by framing peaceful citizens as enemies of the state, Trump wasn't solving problems, he was creating them. And the most dangerous part, he didn't seem to care who got hurt in the process as long as the headline stayed centered on him. Kimmel put it bluntly. Trump wants there to be a war going on. The garbage can fire, the lone scuffle, the out-of-context camera shots were suddenly transformed into symbols of anarchy because that's exactly what Trump needed them to be. He called in 4,000 National Guard troops and 700 active duty Marines to Los Angeles. Not because the situation required it, but because the image of federal troops marching into an American city fit the story he wanted to tell. Think about that. The same president who dragged his feet during California's devastating wildfires, who mocked the state's pleas for federal aid, who ignored real emergencies when lives were actually at stake, suddenly jumped into action for protests that local officials described as mostly calm. When California was burning, he did nothing. When people marched with signs, he sent the Marines. That contrast alone tells you everything about his priorities. But here's where it gets even more bizarre. When confronted about his decision to militarize Los Angeles, Trump didn't double down on law and order. Instead, he turned to one of his strangest scapegoats. He had trees. Yes, trees. With a straight face, Trump began talking about how California didn't manage its forests properly, how the state didn't sweep the forest floors, how leaves piling up on the ground were the real culprit behind devastation. It was a surreal moment. Here was a leader of the free world facing protests over racial justice, deploying troops against his own citizens. And instead of addressing the heart of the matter, he rambled about forest management and how other countries supposedly avoided wildfires by cleaning their floors. The absurdity was almost too much to process. As Jimmy joked, any day now, Trump was going to send a fleet of Roombas to clean up the forests. The truth, of course, is that this wasn't about trees. This was about distraction. Trump wanted to change the subject to pivot away from criticism to shift blame anywhere but himself. Whether it was blaming Governor Cuomo for death, pointing at protesters as agitators, or talking about leaves and branches, the strategy was always the same. Manufacture chaos, spread fear, distract from the real issues, and make himself look like the savior swooping in to restore order. But the cracks in this illusion were already beginning to show. Because while Trump was busy spinning stories about riots, another narrative was unfolding that he couldn't control his very public feud with Elon Musk. For years, Trump had courted tech billionaires, praised them, used them to reinforce his image as a businessman president. But when Elon Musk broke ranks and called Trump out, the blowback was massive. Even right-wing media couldn't ignore it. Suddenly, Trump wasn't just fighting Democrats, protesters, or governors. He was fighting his own allies. And the side of Trump clashing with Musk was something even his supporters couldn't easily explain away. As Jimmy Kimmel quipped, it felt like watching dad and dad fight. Awkward, uncomfortable, impossible to ignore. And it proved that not even Trump's most powerful friends were immune to turning on him when the truth became too heavy to ignore. This feud didn't happen in a vacuum. It happened while Trump was already under scrutiny for his connections, his statements, and his long history of deflecting blame. People were talking about the Epstein list, about powerful names being exposed, and Trump's name surfacing in uncomfortable contexts. At a moment when Trump desperately wanted the nation to look anywhere else, Elon Musk lit another fire, a digital one this time that Trump couldn't put out. Suddenly, chaos in Los Angeles wasn't just about protests. It was about covering for cracks in Trump's own political foundation. And that's the real story here. None of this, neither the National Guard deployment, nor the forest floor speeches, nor the fruit vendor jokes was random. It was all part of a pattern. When Trump faces scrutiny, he distracts. When he's cornered, he creates an enemy. When reality threatens to expose him, he manufactures a crisis to blur the truth. Jimmy Kimmel didn't just mock this, he exposed it. He reminded Americans that leadership isn't about scaring people into submission. It's about calming fears, offering solutions, and protecting communities. Trump's version of leadership was the opposite. He lit fires, both literal and metaphorical, then demanded applause when he showed up with a garden hose. This brings us to the core question. Why does Trump need chaos? The answer is as unsettling as it is simple. Because without it, he is nothing. Peaceful protests don't keep him in the headlines. Calm skies don't get his base riled up. Solutions don't feed his political brand. But fear is his oxygen. Division is his fuel. And as long as he can convince Americans that the nation is constantly under attack by immigrants, by protesters, by governors, even by trees, he can keep presenting himself as the only one who can save it. That's why Jimmy's response was so powerful. He stripped away the illusion, showed the calm behind the supposed storm, and asked the one question Trump never wants to hear. Who struck the match in the first place? In the end, Los Angeles wasn't in flames. It wasn't overrun. It was a city where ordinary people were standing up peacefully for their neighbors, demanding justice, demanding to be heard. The only inferno was the one burning in Trump's rhetoric, fanned by cameras eager to capture every staged moment of drama. And maybe that's the greatest irony of all. The president who claims to hate the media depends on it more than anyone else. Without the cameras, without the drama, without the endless loop of chaos, the illusion falls apart. And that's where Exposed Nation comes in. Because while others watch the smoke, we ask who's holding the lighter. While others repeat the headlines, we peel back the layers to show what's really happening. This wasn't just about Los Angeles. It wasn't just about Jimmy Kimmel. It wasn't even just about Elon Musk. It was about a presidency built on distraction. A playbook designed to keep Americans divided, afraid, and looking the wrong way. And if we stop for just a moment to look past the chaos, the truth becomes clear. Leadership isn't about creating emergencies. It's about preventing them. And no amount of finger-pointing, no army of Marines, no wild theory about trees will change that.